Okay, hello everyone. I guess you can hear me okay. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry that this talk is in the middle of your lunch. I'll try and make it easy to digest. My name's Lucian Wishick, and I'm a VB. That means more specifically, I'm the Visual Basic Specification Lead. I look after the language itself, its syntax, its grammar, its new features, how the new features interact with the old features. One of the other roles of my job that I really love is speaking with users of VB. So please, I'd really like to chat with you. Come to the lounge, speak with me, tell me what you're up to, how VB is helping you, what kind of things you'd like to see in it, what's on the top of your mind. Just to encourage you, I have a bunch of these I'm a VB name tapes. If you buy a US Army surplus shirt, they look kind of cool, sewn above the lapel. There are only a few, so come find me. I'll be in the Visual Studio Lounge. Luca already talked about co-evolution strategy in his talk yesterday. Co-evolution strategy, just to recap, we announced it at PDC last year. It says any major new feature that we introduce into one of the languages, VB or C#, we'll also introduce into the other language. What that means in practice is that any major new framework that comes out that is readily usable by users of one language, it will also be readily usable by users of the other language. Practically, if you choose to invest in C# now, your investment won't be lost. If you choose to invest in VB now, your investment won't be lost. You can choose whichever language based on preference. So that was the strategy. This talk, I'm going to be showing how we've put it into practice. We had the keynote this morning on Silverlight 4, and I thought I'm going to start with a new application. I'll create a Silverlight 4 application, and we'll see how the new features we've added to Visual Basic work in it. The application, although it's Silverlight 4, I'm going to be doing a tour of pretty much all of the new features of the language and some of the old features like XML literals. And so you'll see everything that you learn. It doesn't just apply to Silverlight, it also applies to regular desktop applications. Let's get straight into the demo. The goal of this project, it'll be a Silverlight project. It's going to retrieve a list of Twitter items, and it's going to display them inside a Silverlight application, and we'll see what kind of manipulation we can do with it. I'm going to start a new Silverlight application, make it a ASP.web website. By the way, everything I'm doing here, it's just using the publicly downloadable Beta 2, publicly downloadable Silverlight 4, so you can do everything yourself. Let's just make it a bit bigger. This talk is about the VB language. It's not about Silverlight, so I'm going to gloss over quickly all of the magic that's Silverlight. I won't spend time talking about it. I just want to get it ready by sticking in two things. Let's say font size equals 16, so it's big enough to read. Items source equals binding. This is a piece of XAML magic. It's not the focus of my talk. If you're not already familiar with XAML, definitely follow up about it elsewhere. I'll touch back on what I did for that later. Let's put a button down. So what's going to happen is when the user clicks on this button, it's going to fetch from Silverlight current tweets which have #PDC09 in the title, also ones that have #VB10 in the title. Hey, if any of you have cell phones and want to tweet away, put #VB10 in it, and we'll see it appear live on screen, hopefully. Just before I start, I kind of like to program with option strict on a lot of the time. Okay, when we click the button, let's start with something simple. dim C as new observable collection. So this collection object is going to contain all of the tweets. Just Before I get onto the tweets themselves, I'm going to start with adding some strings to it. I've added hello there world. If I run this application, click the button, it should say hello there world, but it's not. And that's because I forgot to do a piece of magic. Listbox1.dataContext equals C. This is the magic I mentioned earlier in Silverlight. Item source equals binding is what I wrote in the XAML. Listbox1.dataContext equals C means that any changes I make to the collection C will be reflected in the list box that we see. By the way, that's why I used observable collection rather than a normal generic collection of some sort. Let's run it again and see it work. Hello there, world. Okay, we're on the right track. You know, I look at this and I think we're all computer programmers, and the distinguishing feature of a computer programmer, they never do things more than once. If they see 3 statements that are doing the same thing, they turn it into a for loop. For each S in new string array of hello there world c.add of S.
Obviously, it'll do exactly the same thing. This lets me tell you about the first new feature. I don't know how many of you have already come across it. No, these line continuation characters, they were required in previous versions. They were a pain to write, and as of now, they're no longer needed. We can systematically go through and delete them all. And I think it makes the code look nicer. You think it looks nicer too. Sometimes I forget, right? If you find me typing underscores in here, shout at me. Shout, death to the underscores, and I'll delete them. Here's another thing. New string array. That doesn't help us, the programmer. I mean, we look at this array and we know that it's an array of strings. All it was doing in old versions was telling the compiler what's up. So we can delete that now. For each S in, and it's just got a plain old array. And if I hover over S, I don't know how well you can see that, it says dim S as string. In other words, we call this feature array literals. You just type in the array, it automatically infers the type of the array. Actually, there are some more neat tricks we can do with it. If I have a matrix, just like that, I've created a 2-dimensional array. If I hover over it, it infers that it was a 2-dimensional array of integers. Let's try something else. This, obviously, it'll be an array of integers, yeah? How about if I do something like this? Here I've put in some integers, and I've also put in some doubles. What do you think it will figure out for the type of this array? What it figures out, it can't use integer. It figures out double will be the most appropriate type for this array. Why am I telling you these things? I mean, they're small features, but actually, in practice, we're using arrays every single day of our coding lives. And just these small things do make a difference to how much fun it is to program in the language. So that was the feature of array literals. Oh, there's one other way we could do this. From is a new keyword that we added here. Dim C as a new collection from, and then I gave it a list of elements. What are we doing here? Well, in practice, all this does is it calls add on the list. So it's adding hello, it's adding there, it's adding world. But if you went to Luca's talk, he was saying how one of the features was declarative programming. You want to say what you want. You don't want to tell a compiler how to do it. And that's what's happening here. We say we want a new collection from this initializer, and we leave it to itself to invoke the add method. Okay, it might look a bit boring here, but we can do more fancy things like a new dictionary. And then the things inside the collection initializer, they can be the dictionary pairs.
Again, that works because a dictionary has an add method, and this amounts to exactly the same as doing d.add of hello, 1, and d.add of world, 2. And you can go crazy with this feature. If you have your own collection class with your own add method, you can call that using this exactly the same collection initializer syntax. Just small tips and tricks that we'll be using every day in our day-to-day lives as working programmers. Someone asked me once, what is a VB programmer? And I heard the answer, a VB programmer is someone who wants to go home to his family in the evening and spend time with his wife and children. And these small things, I think they'll add up. Okay, let's start getting serious, actually. We said that this application that we're going to build, it's going to collect a Twitter feed. So we're going to get serious. I'm sorry, I mistyped here. I deleted stuff randomly. We're going to collect a Twitter feed. That's going to be an XML feed from Twitter, and it's going to collect a load of tweets. And so we're going to start by creating a data structure which is going to represent each tweet that we fetched from it. I've started here with a class tweet. It's got a property called name. We've got the getter. We've got the setter. We've got the private backing field. Once again, we look at this and we think, what a load of boring boilerplate code. I want to get home to my wife and children. I want to type it more quickly. There we have it. Auto-implemented properties, a much easier way to implement properties. You ask, why did you do this? Why didn't you just use fields? Well, I mean, you all know that you have to use properties in some places. You can't just use fields. Maybe you want it for serialization or data binding, or you want to preserve binary compatibility of the libraries you build. That's why you need properties. That's why you want properties to be easier to do. We can also initialize them, of course, if we wanted, just like we could with fields. Okay, new feature, auto-implemented properties to make things easier to do. I'm going to do a few more for my tweet class. For each tweet, I'm going to get the name of the person who tweeted, the time they tweeted, the content, 280, 140 characters, and the hyperlink to the place that it comes from. I also added a small toString function so we can see what it looks like. Let's get a bit more serious with this. I'm going to take the collection and put it as a field inside my class. I'm going to put the data binding inside the constructor. Let's just check that I've defined everything work and it's wiring up properly. I'm going to add a few tweets here. C.add, it creates a new tweet. It sets some of the properties of each tweet. Let's run it to check that the tweets are displaying when I click the button. Yeah, they are. This is all pre-canned data that I just typed in. I wanted to remind myself, Dustin Campbell is talking tomorrow on Visual Basic IDE tips and tricks. He got some really neat things, like he writes an anonymous class. Actually, I'm not going to tell you what his tips and tricks are. I don't want to steal his thunder. But he could write what I did in about a quarter of the time. Definitely go to it. His talk is at Thursday at 12:45. Another lunchtime talk, I'm afraid, but well worth it. Okay, now we can get really serious. Instead of just doing pre-canned data, we're going to go live. Standard .NET way and Silverlight or desktop applications create a new web client object. This is the guy who's going to fetch the feed. I checked in advance. This is the URL of a Twitter feed which will have the search results for #PDC09. So we're going to fetch that. Once we've fetched it, add handler client.download string completed, address of on completed. I'm going to generate a stub for uncompleted so I can start working on it. Actually, I'm not going to do this. The reason I'm not going to do this is it's kind of a pain. It starts to look a bit like spaghetti. Someone reading this code or reviewing it will come along and they'll say private sub uncompleted. Oh God, how many methods does this class have? As a responsible code reviewer, I have to understand every method that the class has. I have to comment it properly. I have to know where it's going. And you think, I don't want to pollute my class with stupid methods like that, so let's do it more efficiently. Cut this out. And instead of add handler with an address of some other class member, we'll put the sub right in line. It's giving me squigglies because the names have already been used. Let's get rid of these because they're not actually needed. What have we done here? We've used a new feature in the new version of Visual Basic called multi-line statement lambdas. What these are letting us do is they're allowing us to get rid of the spaghetti code that we'd have had to do to program Silverlight otherwise and do it in a more natural way. This is coevolution in practice. C# already had these multi-line statement lambdas. We added them. Now we're every bit as good at programming Silverlight. Hey, there's another reason why we'd want to put it in here. Let's suppose I wanted to do something like that, a message box.show of client.base address. Client is a local variable that I declared inside this method. Remember when I declared the onCompleted method outside, it had no visibility of this local variable. It really created spaghetti code and you'd need complicated wiring to wire it up, to remember where the client variable was, to make it visible. Maybe you've had to add a new private member to this class. What a mess. Multi-line statement lambdas make this important Silverlight pattern a heck of a lot easier. Actually, they make everything a lot easier. Task parallel library. It uses multi-line statement lambdas throughout. We're going to be using these a lot. Well, now it's time for some XML, actually. What we get from Twitter is a feed, and the feed is in XML format. In order to do XML, we just need to add a reference to the XML libraries. Let's browse c:/program files, Microsoft, SDKs, Silverlight, version 4, libraries. It's a bit of a pain. System.xml.link.dll. Hey, did any of you notice what I just did? I'm going to do it again. Right-click, add reference. There it is, in 200 milliseconds rather than the 30 seconds it used to take in the previous version of Visual Studio. We're very happy with this. dim RSS equals xml.link.xelement.parse of e.result. So we got back the string from the web service. It's an XML string, but it's just a string. We're going to parse it into an X element. I should actually do something first. I don't know how many of you were at the keynote this morning, and Scott Guthrie was doing his demo, and the server stopped working. And at the moment, I'm majorly vulnerable in this talk to Twitter not working. I remember hearing this definition. The question is, what is a distributed system? Answer, a distributed system is where your talk stops working because a machine you've never heard of across the ocean has stopped working, and you don't know why. I'm going to protect myself against that. I prepared a pre-canned file, add existing item, offline defaults. The reason I did that is just if Twitter happens to be offline, or it's not working, or the network here is down, then at least I'll have something to show you guys. If if e.error is nothing, in other words, if there was no error getting the result, then we'll use the result. Otherwise, we'll use this default RSS that I pre-prepared in that file you saw me add. There's one more thing I'm going to do just to protect myself. I don't know how many of you have been checking Twitter. They do rate limiting when you do Twitter searches. They do rate limiting by IP address. And I believe that every single computer in PDC is filtered through the same IP address or something behind an NAT. And so Twitter has been rate limiting the heck out of us here. I wrote my own little mirror, herbert.wishick.com/tweet.exe ? This is just the machine that's sitting in my basement back home in Seattle. I send the request there. It's going to send the request straight onto Twitter, come back and come back here, except Twitter will think it will be a different IP number. So I hope it's going to work that way. So we've got some XML. Question, what's Twitter going to give us as XML? I prepared an example of what it gives us. It's this giant mess of XML following certain schemas, blah, blah, blah. You go blind looking at it. Let's check it out in Notepad. No, it's still no better. Select it all, copy it into the clipboard, and I'm going to use what I think is one of my favorite features of Visual Basic, XML literals and IntelliSense. So we saw that massive XML. We don't quite know what the structure is. We're going to get Visual Basic to help us with it. Add a new item. Add XML to schema. Type or paste XML. I'm going to paste what I got from the clipboard. What it's done is it's looked at the XML example, it's dug into it, it's figured out what is the structure of the XML, and it's going to use that to give me IntelliSense for the XML. None of this is new. It's been around in Visual Studio 2008, but it's so useful it's worth mentioning again, especially now with Silverlight, right? And XAML and Office XML formats. Everything's XML nowadays. Have you heard the saying about XML? If XML isn't working for you, XML is like violence. If it's not working for you, you're not using enough of it. Okay, so we've got some XML schemas. Let's import an XML namespace. What's it done here? I'm sorry, I don't know how well the back of you can read. It's examined that Twitter feed that we got from Twitter. It looked at the XML. It said, okay, Twitter is using 4 XML schemas in what it produces, 4 of them here. I happen to know that Atom is the W3C standard one that covers all RSS feeds. That's the important one. That's the one I'm going to use for this application. And then we're in a good position to do something with it. Dim entries equals from entry in RSS.entry. Select tweet equals new tweet with dot name equals entry dot. This is where the IntelliSense is kicking in. It said the tags that were useful inside that document are these. Well, I'll pick the author one. What does an author have inside it in that example? Name and URI? Well, I'll pick the name. And it just goes on, and we can populate the rest of it, and I've pre-populated it here. Sorry about that. Delete, 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 delete. Okay, so we've populated the tweet class. We've put in the name, the title, the time, the URL. And again, we're using the XML accessors built into the VB as of 2008 to dig into the structure. I put an order by clause at the end so that any tweet that mentions pound VB10, it'll go to the top of the list, hopefully. I think this is interesting. I mean, XML literals are nothing new, and they're all coming together so well. I reckon that us, here in this room, us VB developers, are really uniquely suited to ride the Silverlight wave because of these features. They all come together so beautifully. VB really is a first-class citizen for programming Silverlight. Let's stick it into the collection. And we're done. We're not done. There's an error here. Option strict on disallows implicit conversions from blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, I tried to increase the size of the tooltip, but I didn't quite get it right. I'll write out what it said. It cannot convert from IEnumerable of tweet into IEnumerable of object. And you look at that and think, that's stupid. I mean, of course we can convert a tweet into an object because everything can be converted into an object. Why can't we convert an IEnumerable of tweet into an IEnumerable of object? The answer here is a bit of a mixed message. When you're writing desktop applications, you can. You can just write exactly this code and it works perfectly efficiently and it's great. Silverlight 4, we didn't quite have time to bring this feature into Silverlight 4, so we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way here. .cast of object. It works. What this is doing is it's going through the list, and every single one of them, one by one, it's converting into object. The way I had earlier was better because it just did the entire list in one go without having to iterate through the elements. What feature is it that's letting us do this? It's called co- and contravariance. This was quite a headache for us to code back at Redmond. I don't know, have any of you read Neuromancer by William Gibson? He talks about a basilisk. A basilisk is some image that you look at, and it's so confusing that when you stare at it for more than 5 seconds or so, your brain turns to mush. Okay, co- and contravariance for the detailed implementation, exactly the same. It was a basilisk. We had so many heads exploding in the corridors of DevDiv back in Microsoft. Cleaners had an awful time mopping the brains off the floor because there were carpets, they didn't come off easily. We figured out the secret. We did pair programming. One guy closes his eye, the other guy closes his ears, and we could just about get by. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the details of it. The important thing is, thanks to co- and contravariance, the obvious things that should work just do work, like IEnumerable of tweet can be converted to IEnumerable of object. It works with a bunch of other classes, like the read-only classes, like IEnumerable is read-only, action, delegate, these function, these other types also have the same thing working. Time to go live and see if it works. Fingers crossed. Click the button. Wait for some data to fetch. 128. That's now. Okay, so this is live. It worked. By the way, people, the blend preview, blah, 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 blah. Well, there we have it. Hey, Jeff Keys, VB10 it rocks at PDC 10. Hey, Greg Duncan, VB10 rocks. Brilliant, thank you. This is all going recorded and it will be online, so these words will be immortalized forever. Actually, I'm going to do one more thing. Like when I click button once, it takes a while to fetch because it's going via Seattle and then Twitter. If I click it a second time, I've kind of lost the sense of refresh. I don't know when exactly it's done the refresh. Let's change that. As soon as we click the button, we'll use an array literal just to empty the list, so we'll see it being emptied and then repopulated afterwards. That way, click the button the first time, we see it populated, click it a second time, and we see the flicker as it's doing something to refresh. That refreshed way too quickly. I guess what's happening is it's picking up a cached version of the page rather than going back and refetching it. Well, that's an everyday use of array literals. Great. What have we come to in this talk? We're encoding in WPF. We've covered pretty much most of VB's new language features. There are a few new features. I'm sorry, I won't have time to get into them, like optional parameters. You can now specify defaults for optional parameters for every data type, not just reference types. Embedded interrupt types, which are useful for people who are coding Office solutions, blah, blah, blah. But I want to shift gear at the moment. What we've had at the moment is we've had this Silverlight ghetto inside the web page, and the VB has just been accessing the WPF inside that ghetto. It's time to break out of it. It's time to show new features of Silverlight 4, interrupt in both directions. First, interrupt from the HTML elements, from the JavaScript, from the document object module into Visual Basic, and then interrupt the other direction. Visual Basic is going to manipulate the DOM of the web page itself. That means it's going to change the tags around and do stuff like that. That's where we're going to see the new powers of Silverlight 4, and we're going to see more of coevolution in practice, because under the hoods, this is using new features, dynamic language runtime. We added the plumbing for this into Visual Basic 10 to make sure that for VB10, you can do everything that you could in other languages, every bit as easily. So let's start on this project. There is some plumbing to do to get the interrupt to work. First thing I've done, I've said, dear JavaScript, whenever you refer to a variable named SL main page, that's me, that is. Next bit of plumbing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put an HTML button on the page. Whenever we click that button, it's going to invoke a .NET function that we've written in VB. And the way we need to do that to work is we need to annotate the function in VB with this browser.scriptable member. That makes it visible from JavaScript. At the moment, all it's going to do is print up in a message box, I'm in VB, but we're going to see how we can do more useful stuff with this later. Hey, did you notice we didn't need the underscore here anymore? Okay, let's look at the web page itself. This was all code spat when I did the file new Silverlight new ASP project. This talk isn't about JavaScript, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just need some way to identify the object. This object is the Silverlight plugin on the page. And then let's create the HTML button on here. It's a button, it's an HTML button, and whenever the user clicks this HTML button, it's going to say document. That's the root of the document object module. It's the root of every element that you access programmatically on the page. We're going to look for this SLP, the Silverlight plugin. It's going to look for that SL main page variable that we talked about earlier, and it's going to invoke the .NET method that we talked about. Let's run it. There's the VB page. I click it, and it has a message box in VB. Okay, brilliant. We have easy interrupt one way from JavaScript into .NET. That means you can do all of your difficult stuff in .NET, and the question is, how do you get it back into the HTML page? Let's do something about that. Let's put a div here. Div ID equals VB content. This content will be replaced by VB. Inside the button to click handler, we're going to replace the content of this HTML page. Let's see how we do that. First step, dim document equals windows.browser.htmlpage.document. This is getting exactly the same document object I mentioned earlier. It's the root of the entire web page. It's how we access programmatically every part of it. And let's do something with it. Document.getElementById of VB content. That's the thing we had earlier. Inner HTML equals. And it's part of a web page. It's all HTML. Perfect use of XML literals. I am in VB. Hear me roar. There's an error here. Option strict on disallows late binding. I kept that just to remind myself to tell you. The DOM, everything in JavaScript, everything in the HTML page, it all totally works with late binding. So we have to turn option strict off for this kind of coding. And it reminds me to tell you that this is how the interrupt works with the dynamic language runtime. We have document, which is the DOM object. It's part of the web page domain. It's wrapped around with a DLR wrapper, the dynamic language runtime wrapper. And this is the one which says when I access a dot property from it, like .innerHTML, it's going to feed it through. It's going to use the correct machinery to dispatch or to access this property inside the real DOM object. And then VB can communicate to the DLR thanks to the work that we did under the hood. Let's delete the option strict on. The error goes away, and I should be able to run it. Click the button, and there we have it. We've put some HTML into the web page. This looks silly here, of course, but this is important. I could count on one hand with all of the fingers chopped off, apart from one thumb, the number of languages which have good HTML and language inside them. You might have been coding in PHP, and it's just kind of a pain, or ASP, and it's better, but it's still not quite there. You might have been programming in JavaScript, where, God, to mix the HTML and the JavaScript, it's really not pleasant. Visual Basic is really special for being a language where this kind of thing makes perfect sense. It really has come together for this platform. I'm very excited about it. This is a bit corny. I'm going to put something a bit better. Image body. Oops, I missed. Okay, just a bunch of code, but it's doing exactly the same thing as we did with the Twitter feed. Client as new web client, and then it does a download string async. Here it's fetching from localhost. We add handler with client download string completed. We have the multi-line sub lambda, this new feature we added to VB10 to make it easier to hook up, to make it a bit less spaghetti-like. We're parsing the result. And then finally, document.getElementById.innerHTML. We're sticking it inside there. Let's run it. This web service is one that I wrote earlier. I happen to have put a bunch of, well, let's run it. What the web service does is it scans its current directory for a list of images, and it just gives an index of the images that are available to the web service. It's a corny example, but I wrote this web service as a Visual Basic console application just to show you. Bear with me, because this is kind of neat. Dim files equals mycomputer.filesystem.getFiles. It's looking for all files which are called star.jpg, or star.jpg with an E, or star.gif. Star.gif, star.gif, I don't know what you call it. Using an array literal, I told you, they really come in every single day of your coding. What does a web service look like? Well, it prints out a line that says content type, it prints a blank line, and then it can print whatever it wants. In this case, I wanted to print some XML because my web service is in XML, and I'm using Visual Basic's XML literals. I'm embedding a piece of VB inside them. It's looking through all of the files, sorting them alphabetically, emitting some text, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of exciting. I used to be writing all of my web services in PHP once upon a time. That got really spaghetti. I switched to doing Python, and then I switched to VB, and I've really found it's kicked off. It's made it a lot safer for the web services I'm writing. Well, that's just a fun experiment. And that's how I wanted to end the talk. Just point you in some future other places to look at. I mentioned a few times Luca Bolognese's talk. It was yesterday. If you haven't seen it already, either get a time machine or catch it online. Future directions for C# and Visual Basic. He was talking about declarative programming, like we've seen a few times here. XML literals, arch example of declarative programming. Also, we were using DLR interop for Visual Basic to interop into the HTML page. Also, check out Mads Torgerson's talk. It was yesterday, so look at it online. His talk was dynamic binding in C#4. Actually, what he did, all of it works perfectly in VB as well, of course. And I have to mention Dustin Campbell's talk. Really amazing what he does with the IDE. Really worth seeing. And that's it. What I'd like you guys to do, download Visual Studio 2010 Beta 2. Download Silverlight 4. I'm sorry, I didn't put the link on this because the slides went out public before Silverlight 4 had been announced, so I couldn't put them on at that time. Visit the forums, file bugs, visit the Developer Center, and come find me. I'll be in the lounge area in the Visual Studio place. Just a reminder, I have these I'm a VB name tapes if you want to grab some swag from Visual Basic, and if you're proud about being a VB like I am. Thank you very much. Questions. So just if one or two people want to come here and chat, but the best place will be the lounge. Thank you.